It was pure insanity, something America had never seen before and never expected. Quote, "Here it just didn't stop. That was the amazing part. It just did not stop." Private First Class William Purcell stared down his rifle sight at enemies wearing full battle gear, not the North Vietnamese guerrilla fighters in sandals he'd been trained to fight. The fog and rain had grounded air support. Artillery positioned 11 miles away couldn't help in the narrow streets. His fellow Marines fell in the open, exposed to crossfire from fortified buildings. A terrible realization dawned. They were fighting a different war than they'd been told existed. As 10,000 NVA and Viet Cong fighters flooded Vietnam's third largest city during the 1968 Tet Offensive, it became clear that the ancient stone walls of Hue Citadel hid a devastating secret. Enemy at the gates. On the morning of January 30th, 1968, the fragile ceasefire during the Tet holiday was shattered. The peace that had been promised evaporated as early attacks by joint NVA and VC fighters at Nha Trang and Quy Nhon forced its cancellation, leaving the city of Hue vulnerable. Hue, Vietnam's former capital and the South's largest city with over 140,000 residents, held strategic importance due to its location on key supply routes. The Citadel, a walled fortress on the Perfume River's northern bank, served as a vital stronghold for controlling movement and logistics in central Vietnam. That day, Tet Nguyên Đán, the Lunar New Year celebration, left most South Vietnamese forces, the ARVN, on leave, leaving the city's defenses dangerously thin. General Trong, realizing that the NVA-BC would strike, moved his headquarters staff to the Mang Ca compound and immediately ordered a few platoons to key locations: the provincial headquarters, the power station, the prison. He bolstered the Citadel's gates with additional platoons, while his most experienced unit took position at the Tai Loc airfield, prepared for any sudden escalation. By nightfall, the word of the ceasefire's collapse had yet to reach the Military Assistance Command Vietnam, or MACV compound, leaving those inside wholly unprepared for the battle about to unfold. In response, an ARVN reconnaissance team ventured to the north bank of the Perfume River, a critical route into the city. By midnight, the team had spotted enemy movement, NVA soldiers on the move, heading toward the city. The scouts reported the sighting, possibly 8,000 strong. But when aircraft were dispatched for confirmation, they returned without evidence of the enemy. If 8,000 NVA and VC troops, well armed with 82mm mortars and 57mm recoilless rifles, were in the city, 400 South Vietnamese defenders stood no chance, unless the U.S. Marines arrived with reinforcements. Hours passed, and the city settled into uneasy quiet. Then, in the midnight hours, rain began to fall, shrouding the city in thick fog, hindering the possibility of aerial and artillery support vital to the defenders. Just after 2:30 a.m. on January 31st, a signal flare lit the sky, and the city was plunged into chaos. 2 battalions from the NVA 6th Regiment stormed the western wall of the Citadel, targeting the Mang Ca garrison. Meanwhile, a 6-man NVA sapper team, disguised as South Vietnamese soldiers and armed with AK-47s and B-40 rocket launchers, ambushed the gate guards at Chan Tai and breached the city's defenses. As the gates opened, enemy forces flooded through. NVA units pushed into the city's narrow streets and buildings. A secondary team, initially assigned to enter the Mang Ca garrison through a sewer system, rerouted to the Hue Gate. There, they suffered casualties, but ultimately took the gate. The enemy surged into the city, but encountered brutal opposition from ARVN forces, the South Vietnamese army at the Tai Loc airfield. The battle there was a bloody back-and-forth affair. Despite the South Vietnamese putting up a fierce resistance, the NVA broke through, taking control of the airfield. Elsewhere in the city, the NVA continued their assault, scaling the northwestern walls of the Citadel. The defenders at An Hoa and Hao gates were overwhelmed as the gates fell, and the floodgates opened. The NVA now had free rein to push deeper into the city. Here come the Marines. Before the main U.S. Marine Force arrived, South Vietnamese Army, or ARVN troops, had already been locked in a brutal fight against a well-coordinated combined North Vietnamese Army and Viet Cong force, with the NVA committing 10 battalions. Now firmly entrenched within the city walls, NVA troops quickly fortified their gains, digging into bomb shelters and reinforced positions. They were prepared for a long fight. At dawn, the battle intensified. The NVA pushed forward, forcing ARVN units to fall back, street by street. Desperate for support, the defenders called for air cover. The fight in the skies was just as unforgiving. A U.S. Army helicopter was shot down. The crew barely made it out, scrambling to a nearby compound for cover. Chief Warrant Officer Frederick Ferguson, piloting a UH-1 Huey, defied enemy fire to land and extract the trapped crew, pulling them to safety. Ferguson's actions would earn him the Medal of Honor. As January of 1968 came to a close, several battalions of the U.S. Marine Corps were ready to join the fight. The 2nd Battalion, 5th Marines, the 2-5, arrived at Hue in early February, establishing defensive positions around the MACB compound. Their mission was clear: push back the NVA and regain control of the city. Many of the Marines had been trained for jungle warfare, but the urban battlefield was a different beast. Every street, every alley was a potential ambush. The NVA had the advantage, dug into hardened positions, waiting. Adding to the challenge, the 2-5 had arrived without its commander, Lieutenant Colonel Ernest Ernie Cheatham. As a Marine Corps veteran of Korea, he was known for his decisive leadership. He had what some called command posture, focused entirely on his men and the mission, never concerned for his own safety in battle. Now, Hue needed him. Finally, on February 2nd, headquarters ordered Cheatham into the city to lead his battalion. That night, Cheatham joined a convoy heading toward the MACB compound. The vehicles moved cautiously down the flat, exposed stretch of Highway 1, the road illuminated only by the dim glow of headlights. Without warning, the NVA ambushed them from hidden positions along the roadside. The sudden burst of automatic fire from AK-47s and PK machine guns tore through the air, raking the lead trucks. Marines scrambled to return fire, leaning out the side of their vehicles with M16s and M60s, sending rounds back into the darkness. With suppressive fire from the rear trucks, the convoy fought its way through the ambush. The Marines kept their cool, firing back even as they pressed forward until they reached Hue intact. When Cheatham arrived at the MACB compound, the scene was unhinged. As Cheatham described it, quote, "When we got there and finally got to the MACB compound, there were people hanging off the balconies, firing and shooting across the street. Crazy. Nobody knew. You know, they're firing in all 4 directions." Colonel Stanley Hughes, overall commander in Hue, wasted no time. He gave Cheatham a direct order: clear the southern part of the city, no matter what it took. Cheatham recalls his reaction, quote, "As I started out the door, he turned around to me and said, 'Ernie.' I turned back around. He said, 'You don't worry about anything. You just clean those people out, and you clean them out any way you have to.'" The next morning, the 2-5 moved out, advancing along Lillois Street with the Perfume River on their right. Their objective: push west, building by building. 1st Battalion, 1st Marines, the 1-1, moved parallel on the left. If enemy forces were suspected inside a building, the order was simple: bring it down. But progress was slow. In one instance, a fire team attempted to rush across the street under cover of smoke. Gunfire cut through the haze, pinning them down. They needed another approach. The problem was, Marines were trained to use smoke grenades to mask movement. But the moment they popped smoke, snipers and machine gunners unleashed a barrage. The NVA knew their tactics and had set their defenses accordingly. The Marines also knew to improvise, adapt, and overcome. One young lance corporal carrying a 106mm recoilless rifle calmly uttered these words to his commanding officer, quote, "Skip, I know how to do it." Mounted on a small 4-wheeled mule, the weapon was meant for anti-tank use, but against urban fortifications, it was just as effective. Cheatham signaled for to fire. Under heavy enemy fire, 2 Marines rolled the mule into position. Boom. A 106mm round screamed down the street, detonating in the enemy's machine gun nest. The backblast sent up a cloud of dust. In the moment of confusion, Marines charged across the street, finally breaking through. They were learning fast to fight in the city. Taking HQ. The next day, the Marines resumed their advance. Their objective was 6 blocks away, the provincial headquarters. Urban combat demanded speed, surprise, and relentless forward pressure. But standing in their way was a key enemy stronghold, the Treasury Building, where an unknown number of enemy troops were holed up and ready to rain ammo down on the Americans. The plan was simple. One company would lay down covering fire, while another would storm the building. The assault began on the left flank. Company A-11 moved first, securing a Catholic chapel and the Jeanne d'Arc High School. The East School building fell quickly, but the western side turned into a brutal fight. NVA forces pinned down the Marines with interlocking fire. Outside, Sergeant Alfredo Cantu Gonzalez of A Company led his men forward, closing in on enemy positions. As he approached an NVA rocket emplacement, he fired his light anti-tank weapon, knocking it out. But the moment of success was brief. An RPG struck his position. Wounded, he crawled into the St. Joan of Arc Catholic Church, but his injuries were severe. He succumbed to them minutes later. Cantu Gonzalez's bravery earned him the Medal of Honor. Meanwhile, Marines attempting to push past the Treasury Building were halted. More than 100 NVA troops, well entrenched, had turned the area into a danger zone. Sniper fire from the nearby Lilloy Elementary School made any further advance impossible. The battalion consolidated for the night, preparing for another assault. By the end of the day, 1-1 and 2-5 had fought for every inch of ground. But the Marines were up against a force that outnumbered them, possibly 2 or 3 times over. Worse, they weren't facing an enemy on the move. The NVA had fortified every street, every intersection, every building. The Marines had to attack forward, while the enemy only had to hold. And for now, they were doing just that. Taking down the flag. On February 5th, the Marines of 2-5 launched an assault on a new objective, the massive hospital complex spanning 2 city blocks. The overcast skies grounded air support, and the light urban environment made artillery strikes from distant fire bases impractical. The Marines would have to take the buildings on foot, with no outside assistance and with little use for artillery. Cheatham explained the predicament, quote, "As wonderful as our artillerymen are, I wasn't going to have them firing from 11 miles away and trying to fire into a building across the street from me. That's just impossible." The enemy forced the Marines into relentless close-quarters combat. Private First Class William Bill Purcell recounted the challenges of facing the enemy that day, quote, "It's a 35-meter fight. They weren't some little wiry guy running around the bushes in sandals. These fellas had full uniforms, big packs, and good operating rifles. They were about somewhere between 5'6" and 5'10". I mean, these were good-sized guys." Clearing the left flank of the hospital proved just as fierce. Bill Purcell noted, quote, "It was probably some of the most vicious fighting any of us had seen at that point in time. Normally, you'd be in a pretty good firefight. It may last an hour, it may last 5 minutes, it may last half a day, but then you're out of it. Here, it just didn't stop. That was the amazing part. It just did not stop." By nightfall, most of the hospital complex was secure, and the Marines dug in wherever they finished fighting, behind hedges, inside garages, even in chicken coops. During the night, the sky glowed red from burning ammunition canisters, buildings, and trees. At dawn, they pushed forward again, often moving easily through one block before slamming into another heavily defended position. The following day, 2-5 reached the provincial headquarters, where enemy troops had concealed themselves in spider holes. They dug holes along the edges of the walls surrounding the courtyards, hidden under shrubbery or piles of trash. From a distance, it looked like just another heap of debris. But inside, they were watching, peeking out just enough to see the approaching patrol. In a flash, the barrel of an AK-47 slipped up through the mess. A burst of gunfire cracked the air before the shooter vanished back into the hole, leaving nothing but silence behind. The Marines barely had time to react before the next shot came. Despite heavy casualties from both enemy fire and collapsing structures, many Marines refused to withdraw. Cheatham talked proudly of his men, quote, "I don't ever remember seeing people with that commitment, sometimes being wounded once or twice, and some 3 times, and still not leaving. Or when they are evacuated, then finding them sneaking back, because they aren't going to leave their platoon or their squad." The city's civilians suffered as well. Many hid in their homes, terrified. Others fled or sought shelter in government buildings. The NVA-BC, in their push through the city, targeted anyone they suspected of collaborating with the South Vietnamese government. Teachers, intellectuals, and government officials were gunned down in public, adding to the horrors of the battle. Back at the provincial headquarters building, the Marines spotted a Viet Cong flag flying in the courtyard. One company spent most of the day trying to take it down, blasting a hole in the courtyard wall, only to be met with immediate enemy fire. Suppressing fire allowed them to reach the building, remove the flag, and briefly raise an American one before taking it down out of respect for the South Vietnamese. Assault on the Citadel. By February 11th, the battle shifted to the Citadel's northeast wall. The Marines prepared to assault the enemy strongholds inside the ancient fortress, but the Citadel's immense stone walls, some centuries old, made direct attacks nearly impossible. Colonel Stanley Hughes insisted that they could manage something, boldly stating, quote, "We'll blow that wall away." Major Robert Thompson, commander of the 1-5, thought otherwise and tried to warn Colonel Hughes, responding, quote, "No, you won't. We'll be 20 years blowing this wall away. That just won't work." What made matters more difficult was that the South Vietnamese government had banned the use of heavy artillery to limit damage to the city. Combined with the persistent bad weather grounding air support, this left the Marines with few options. So, on February 13th, Marine 1-5, under Major Thompson's command, launched their attack on the Citadel. The Marines advanced only 30 to 40 yards along the eastern wall when they were suddenly pinned down in a crossfire from enemy snipers and machine guns. The distinctive chatter of an RPK light machine gun joined the deep thud of AK-47s, cutting down any Marine foolish enough to move into the open. Then came the order, quote, "Pull back, pull back, pull back, pull back." Those who could retreated, but the wounded lay stranded, the fallen exposed. Relentless enemy fire made rescue nearly impossible. Every attempt drew more gunfire, forcing Marines to crawl, drag, and carry their comrades under constant sniper fire. The extraction operation dragged on for hours, a bloody stalemate with no end in sight. In the aftermath, Major Thompson convinced General Nu Quan Trong of the South Vietnamese Army to lift the artillery ban, except near the Imperial Palace. Thompson also ordered the return of Delta Company, which had been assisting elsewhere. Captain Myron Harrington, a 29-year-old, led Delta Company. On February 14th, his company boarded the landing craft to reinforce the fight inside the Citadel. As they moved up the Perfume River, enemy small arms fire struck the boats, but they pressed on and landed safely. But when they arrived, what they saw was horrifying. Buildings lay in ruins. Vehicles burned. Lifeless bodies, enemy, civilian, and Marine, were strewn everywhere. Worse, the men of Delta saw the extent of the psychological toll on the battered men of the 1-5. But Delta had their own objective: take the Dong Ba Tower, a fortress crawling with North Vietnamese troops. The tower overlooked the entire battalion's advance, making it a critical position to capture. An artillery and naval bombardment preceded the assault. Much of the naval fire overshot the target, but it still rattled the defenders. Delta Company advanced undetected to the tower's base. Harrington sent a squad up the wall. Sniper fire erupted. Bullets zipped through the air, snapping past the Marines as they scrambled for cover. Grenades arced back and forth between the two sides. One Marine, 20-year-old Whitmer from Long Beach, California, ran low on ammunition and began hurling bricks at the enemy to keep them off balance. Then the rockets came. North Vietnamese troops, hidden in trench lines and fighting holes, launched wave after wave of RPG fire. They seemed to appear from nowhere, attacking from deep inside the tower. With the situation deteriorating, Harrington called for artillery support from a fire base 10 miles away. The shells would land dangerously close, just 50 meters in front of them. Normally, artillery fire was directed well ahead and adjusted backward. Here, they were calling it directly onto their position, a desperate measure taken only in extreme circumstances. For 3 more days, Delta Company pushed forward. Finally, on February 16th, after suffering 40% casualties, they took Dong Ba Tower. Mounting tolls. After retaking the Dongba Tower, the fight for Hue continued as the Marines advanced southeast along the Citadel wall. Every morning, the sound of diesel tanks firing up signaled another push forward, another block to seize, another stretch of blood-stained ground to take from the enemy. But progress was slow. Major Thompson called a temporary halt. The North Vietnamese resistance was fierce, and the weather was no ally. Cold mist and relentless rain grounded air support, turning the city into a battlefield where visibility was poor and reinforcements had to fight through the elements as much as enemy fire. When the sky cleared, the sun offered brief windows for airstrikes, but helicopters struggled to reach their targets due to both the weather and heavy ground fire. Marines lay in the open, helpless, as their comrades watched from cover, unable to retrieve them, with the young Whitmer recounting, quote, "I think the thing I remember the most that really bothers me is just seeing Marines laying lifeless in the streets." Resupply was just as dire. Ammunition and food ran dangerously low. Desperate Marines scavenged for anything edible, even resorting to raiding pet fish tanks, but many houses had already been stripped bare by starving civilians or looted by enemy troops. The North Vietnamese, however, faced no such shortages. Reinforcements streamed into the city through the west wall, where the U.S. Army's 1st Cavalry Division had failed to seal off the enemy's supply lines. The Marines were fighting a force that was continuously replenished, while they themselves grew weaker with each passing day. This would lead to some tension in the command decision-making protocol. Amid mounting pressure, Major Thompson defied orders to push forward and gave his men a much-needed day of rest. Exhausted, running on adrenaline and fear, their nerves were frayed from relentless combat. But the higher-ups demanded action. Thompson put it bluntly, quote, "It was the only show in town at that time. We were 12 days late, and Lyndon Johnson was very adamant about getting it over with." The final gate. On February 19th, the Marines resumed their attack. Every inch of ground was contested. In Thompson's words, quote, "It was not a kind of battle that you could high-diddle-diddle up the middle. Everybody outside still had the straw hut mentality. They'd not adjusted to this kind of warfare." Captain Harrington explained the atmosphere of constant fear, quote, "You had no awareness until they started firing at you." On the night of February 20th, the 1-5 Marines' advance ground to a halt. With enemy strongpoints blocking further movement, Thompson and his commanders decided on a bold plan: a night assault, followed by a full battalion attack at dawn. At 3 a.m. on February 21st, 3 10-man teams from 2nd Platoon, Company A, moved out, their M16 rifles at the ready, with each Marine carrying extra grenades for their underbarrel launchers. Under cover of darkness, they advanced on the enemy positions. The strongpoints, unexpectedly thinly defended, fell quickly. The NVA had withdrawn during the night, leaving behind only abandoned AK-47s and crates of ammo. As daylight broke, NVA forces attempted to retake the lost ground, launching a counterattack with AK-47s and RPK machine guns. Caught in the open, they came under devastating Marine fire. The Marines, using their M80s and M79 grenade launchers, tore into the advancing NVA. 16 NVA soldiers and 3 Marines lost their lives. By February 22nd, the Dongba Gate was one of the final strongholds, keeping the Marines from fully securing the southeast wall of the Citadel. They made their final charge toward the wall. Bob Carroll, a veteran at the fight, recalled the moment, quote, "I thought, well, this is it. This is the morning I'll get it. Because, I'm going to run out of luck." But Carroll's dire prediction was wrong, and he noted, quote, "We charged across that wall full speed, and there wasn't a shot fired at us. We hit the top of that wall. The feeling was fantastic." Then, the skies finally opened. With the Marines in control of the wall, air support rained down. Napalm and airstrikes pulverized the enemy, turning fortified positions into flames and rubble. Meanwhile, Alpha Company carried out its final assault, sealing off the last remnants of enemy resistance. The battle was nearing its end. It took 3 more days of brutal fighting, but on February 25th, Hue's Citadel was finally declared secure. The surviving Marines were pulled out of the city by early March, leaving behind a battlefield soaked in blood and destruction. A public betrayed. Hue marked the end of the Tet Offensive, but the victory felt hollow. The South Vietnamese Army, the ARVN, suffered 452 lost and 2,123 wounded, while U.S. forces took 216 lost and 1,584 wounded. On the other side, NVA-BC losses remain unclear, with estimates ranging from 2,400 to over 5,000, plus thousands more injured. Civilians bore the brunt. 844 casualties, 1,900 wounded, and nearly 5,000 executed or missing in the aftermath. The battle leveled 80% of Hue, leaving 116,000 of its 140,000 residents without homes. To many Americans, the battle had revealed a grim truth. Despite the staggering losses inflicted on the enemy, the war was far from over. The media played a decisive role in shaping public perception. Unlike previous wars, Vietnam unfolded on television screens across America, showing raw, unfiltered images of combat. Hue, in particular, became a symbol of the war's brutality. The military could no longer control the narrative. Walter Cronkite, one of America's most trusted journalists, had flown to South Vietnam to witness the aftermath of Tet firsthand. He reported from Hue, summing up the battle in stark terms, quote, "If the communist intention was to take and seize the cities, they came closer here at Hue than anywhere else." Less than a week after returning home, Cronkite delivered his famous broadcast, declaring the war a stalemate, quote, "It is increasingly clear to this reporter that the only rational way out then will be to negotiate, not as victors, but as an honorable people who lived up to their pledge to defend democracy and did the best they could."